We are in the 7th chapter of Isaiah, and the background for this is the Syro-Ephraimitic War, and God has attempted to get Ahaz to rely upon him with the... Is my mic on? Yeah? Well, we've known that for a long time, Paul. God is trying to get Ahaz to rely upon him as far as the trusting him that he doesn't need to worry about these two nations, with the offer, ask for any miracle. He refuses, so God gives the house of Israel a sign, a miracle, that a virgin would be with child. But he also tells them a time frame as to when this Syro-Ephraimitic alliance would be destroyed. And that's in verses 15 and 16, before a child grows up and is old enough to choose the right and to eschew evil or refuse the evil. But then starting in verse 17, we have a punishment for the Assyrian alliance. Ahaz, in rejecting God's offer, has already, or he is making plans, if he has not already implemented those plans, of asking aid from Assyria. So that becomes the background of verses 17 through 25, this punishment that's going to come for Ahaz is making this alliance with Assyria. And he is setting forth the punishment and the severity of it. We had gotten down to verse 22 in that study, that it shall come to pass for the abundance of milk that they shall give, he shall eat butter. For butter and honey shall every one eat that is left in the land. So here's an abundance of milk. Some have suggested the possibility that the nursing animals have lost all of their young. That's why there's an abundance of milk. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it's a possibility at least. But the milk would be used for butter or curds and honey. This is the food or the substance for poorer times. When there's poverty, when there's famine, then they eat curds and honey or butter and honey. And so even though there's this abundance of milk, there's the poorer times. And if you go back to verse 15, it might be tying in with that. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. So it might be going back to that time frame or that aspect in relationship to what he's saying. Even though difficult times are there, they're going to be going through it because of this punishment for Ahaz making an alliance with Assyria. And again, that's Assyria, not Syria. I wish they had changed one of the names to make it more distinguished. There's going to be a remnant that makes it through. And that goes back to the promise of a virgin shall be with child and shall conceive and bear a son, shall call his name Emmanuel. Something that's not fulfilled for 700 years down the line. So there's going to be a remnant that's going to be spared. That's shall everyone eat that is left in the land. There's that remnant left in the land. The majority dead, but there's that remnant left. And of course, that remnant is going to be left in order to fulfill the promise of a Savior that's going to come, this Emmanuel. Without a remnant, if they had been totally destroyed, then the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise that in thee shall all of the families of the earth be blessed would have been destroyed. Could not have been fulfilled if all of them would have been destroyed. So God's going to always keep that remnant in relationship to the people. In verse 23 then, it shall come to pass in that day that every place shall be where there were 1,000 vines at 1,000 silverlings, it shall even be for briars and thorns. So basically, here's this beautiful, bountiful vineyard. 1,000 vines, 1,000 silverlings. So just totally overflowing in relationship to the vineyards. But now then, it shall be for briars and thorns. It's all gone. It's nothing but a briar patch.
It kind of reminds you of what it said in Isaiah 5, 1 through 7. It talks about the line there. If you tie it in, it kind of has the echoes and overlaps.
There's going to be God and the prophets uses similar language to deal with similar events. You see that all the way through. I mean, if you're talking about the destruction of a nation, it's not going to make any difference whether you're dealing with Jerusalem or Assyria or Babylon. He's going to use figures to describe that destruction, and those figures are going to basically be the same thing. So yes, you're going to see that throughout the book and throughout all of the prophets. Bill?
In verse 24, with arrows and bows, men will come. So it's like turned into a wild country, like wilderness.
Yes, and we're going to get to, that's what we were going to say in verse 24. Trying to get ahead of me, but yes, that's basically the figure of verse 24. But right now, here's this beautiful vineyards that they have that are just growing. They're like wildfire, and now then, it's like a briar patch. So a destruction being described, a great punishment. And why? Because they've made this alliance with Assyria instead of relying upon God. Or Ahaz did that. Verse 24 then, yes, with arrows and with bows shall men come thither, because all the land shall become briars and thorns. So the land's now desolate. The only one who's going there are hunters.
Do you have any information on that word silver leaves? Is that silver? I tried to find it there. They said it's not available. Relationship to the actual vines, or was it pieces of silver?
Wouldn't that be a green tree? Similar trees?
Bill, you...
Let's see, I have the New King James, and it says 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver. That's what the New King
1,000 vines and 1,000
Shekels.
shekels of silver.
Shekels of silver.
So,
Same thing Fawcett says.
okay.
1,000 vines and 1,000 silverlings, otherwise the vines they're showing the cost of what they're doing.
The cost of the vines is basically the idea that they are worth so much. They're great in value, basically. The cost of them would be great. Let me use a crude illustration. Go to New York City and try and buy in the middle of New York City an acre of land. How much do you think you're going to pay for it? How many hundreds of millions of dollars? Go to Arizona in the desert and try and buy an acre of land, and how much do you think you'll pay for it? It's not going to be worth that much, is it? Well, this, and you've got all these vines just overflowing, and it's worth, just like that, hundreds of millions of dollars, but all of a sudden, because of this punishment that God's bringing now, then it's almost worthless. That's the idea of 1,000 silverlings, that it just becomes a briar patch that's not worth much. And so verse 24, you have only the hunter goes there. He's looking for wild game. So he's going there with his bows and arrows in order to try and kill some wild game. Verse 25 then, and on all hills that shall be digged with the mattock, there shall not come thither the fear of briars and thorns, but it shall be for the sending forth of oxen and for the treading of lesser cattle. So this is the hills that shall be digged with the mattocks, cultivated hills, basically. They've been, cultivated real nice and beautiful. And again, it becomes a place of briars and thorns, where only the livestock roam and seeking for food. So all through this, God is showing, because you have failed to trust me and you went to Assyria to get your help, you're going to be destroyed, and all of the beauties, all of the glories that you have are going to be turned into worthlessness. It's going to be of no value. Someone put it that such a bleak picture that it is a wonder that the Jews would turn a deaf ear to the prophet, especially knowing that all of it could have been avoided if they had been faithful to God. All of this that he has described here in these verses 17 through 25 avoided if they had just turned to God, listened to Isaiah, but they wouldn't, and so all of this comes upon them.
All that tragedy happens, and it happens for over a century, but in 701, when Sennacherib comes, and Rabshakeh and all his henchmen, and they leave abruptly, and then Jeremiah 25, and Nebuchadnezzar comes a century later, or a little over a century later, and it's just one thing after another. People are judged over time because idolatry takes hold.
it does take they suffer a long time. Once you destroy the land in this way, or the land is destroyed in this way, it takes a long time for it to come back, if nothing else. But yes, during this time and on, they continue to rebel against God, and they continue to be punished by God. And so it is a continuing problem. But is that it? All of this could have been avoided if they had been faithful to God. You look at the sin and wickedness that we see today, and the problems that we have today, and all of those could have been avoided if people had been faithful to God. Those who are Christians many times, and they stop living faithfully, and they lose the peace and the joy that they had with Christ, and instead of turning to Christ and finding that, they just keep going farther and farther away. Same thing, same warnings that you have. It seems to be a habit of people. If you look at the Israelites going back to the period of the Judges, what do you have there? Time of prosperity. What happens to them? They turn away from God, turn to idols. Now, why weren't they smart enough to figure out that faithfulness to God brought them the riches and the prosperity? Well, I don't know why they weren't, other than it just man's nature, in a sense. But they turn away from God. God brings an oppressing nation over them. They cry to God. What happens? He sends them a deliverer who delivers them from the oppression. They become faithful to God, prosper, and it's a cycle that happens over and over and over again through the period of the Judges. Now, again, why weren't they smart enough to say, God's the one who blessed us, we'll stay with God? They weren't. Well, here's this picture of despair and bleakness, destruction, and it can all be avoided if you'll just turn to God and be faithful to Him. And they don't. They refuse.
God's word is full of the word if. This will happen
If.
But this is going to happen if.
For if to be such a small word, it sure is important, isn't it?
But all throughout Isaiah, there's a continual repetitive mention of the word remnant. So there's a remnant that stays faithful throughout.
There's always a remnant that's going to be faithful. And yes, it is mentioned through Isaiah, but it's mentioned through all of the prophets. The time of Jeremiah and Ezekiel was far worse than the time of Isaiah. And yet, in that horrible period of time, you have a remnant still being spoken of. So, it's always going to be there. Chapter 8 then. I knew we'd get through chapter 7 tonight. Chapter 8, the first 4 verses is the fall of Damascus and Syria, the fall of Damascus and Samaria is being prefigured. He says, Moreover, the Lord said unto me, Take thee a great roll, and write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And I took unto me faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jerebiah. And I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son, and said, The Lord Then said the Lord to me, call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. So, in verse 1, Lord's command to Isaiah, this is what you're to do. Take a great roll. Now, why is it to be a great roll? A big name. Well, that's true too. But there's a little bit other significance in it. And yes, it does take a long time to take a long time to write out Maher-shalal-hash-baz and to say it. Basically, take this big roll. Let's use an illustration of someone driving down Softly Field Road here, and you put up a little bitty sign out there with about letters that are about 1 inch high. How many people will read it? Not going to be able to, are they? On the other hand, put up a sign that's about 50 foot wide with letters that are about 10 inches. How many people will see it? Oh, they can read that, can't they? Basically, he's saying take a huge roll. Why? So that everybody can see it and everybody will be able to read it. That's the emphasis of a great roll. And yes, Maher-shalal-hash-baz is surely a long name to write. And that's what he is supposed to write on it, Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Now then, what does his name mean, though? Because does God assign names just for his own whimsical desires? Or is there's a meaning behind them? So you look at the meaning of the name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. What does it mean? I'll give you two ways in which it's defined, and both of them really basically mean the same thing. But one is hasten to the spoil, speed to the prey. The other way in which it's sometimes defined is the spoil speeds, the prey hastens. Now then, if you want to look at those two ways in which it's defined, twiddle-dee, twiddle-dum. Basically, it's just saying the same thing using a little bit different words. This is to be a message to Israel, though. Hasten to the spoil, speed to the prey. In verse 2, so he says, I took unto me faithful witnesses to record Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. Okay. He takes these two witnesses. What is a witness?
Somebody witnesses if a business transaction.
Somebody who witnesses. Well, that's a good definition for a witness, isn't it? Someone who's an eyewitness. So he has to be what?
To witness something, you have to be.
You have to see it, you have to know it. And thus you can relate what you see and what you know to others. That's what a witness is. Are all witnesses faithful? Do all witnesses tell the truth? No. Surely not. Surely all witnesses tell. No, of course not.
Look what happened when Ahab's wife got false witnesses that hurt Nabal.
Okay, that's one illustration, but there's a lot of illustrations that we could use, but Naboth and his vineyard is true. You could talk about Christ. They had found false witnesses against him. Stephen, same thing. The Bible's filled with people who are false witnesses.
John answers are pretty simple. That which we have seen, which we have heard, which we have handled, which we have tasted. He's a witness.
He is a witness. Why? Because he had actually seen it, felt it, or touched it. Hands had handled it.
That's why they used to call it an eyewitness.
Why they oftentimes call it an eyewitness.
Thomas was a witness. He stuck his hands in nail prints.
Okay, all of these are true. How many more do you want to bring up? I mean, yes, Jesus was a faithful witness. The apostles were faithful witnesses. Now then, he is getting faithful witnesses, and these two, Uriah and Jerobekiah, are the two that are actually Zechariah, the son of him. So Uriah and Zechariah are the two witnesses that Isaiah uses. The only thing is, it seems a little strange, at least to me. Uriah, the priest, was an accomplice of Ahaz in idolatry. Now then, he would not be likely to assist Isaiah, would he? If I've done something and I have a close friend of mine, close buddy, and he's going to testify for me, how much credence do you give to that person? Well, he might be telling the truth, but he might be shading the truth simply because he's my friend. On the other hand, here's someone who is a bitter enemy of mine, and he testifies of it. Now then, do you have someone that you can say, I believe him because there's not going to be any shading of the truth other than being against him? Now, that's what you have here. You have someone who will at least be honest enough, but would be in a sense an enemy of Isaiah. He's not going to assist Isaiah because here he is complicit with Ahaz. And so he's going to be able to witness or testify concerning this matter. Now maybe that's why he is selected Zechariah or Uriah, as because he's not likely to assist Isaiah. But now then, he's going to be at least a faithful witness along that line. In verse 3 then, I went unto the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Lord unto me, call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Now then, a lot of people go back with this verse that he went into the prophetess and she conceived, and they go back to Isaiah 7 and verse 15 or verse 14, because this is still within the same context, overall context, because it's still in that Syro-Ephraimitic alliance coming against Jerusalem, and Ahaz's refusal to ask for a sign. And the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Well, here Isaiah goes to the prophetess, and she conceives and bears a son. And so they see a parallel to these two verses, so that they say Isaiah 7:14 is actually being fulfilled by Maher-shalal-hash-baz, and Isaiah going into the prophetess. Now then, we mentioned that and discussed it a little bit more when we were going through Isaiah 7:14. But Maher-shalal-hash-baz is not Emmanuel, is he? The names mean different things. The name Emmanuel means what? God with us. Okay, the name Maher-shalal-hash-baz means what? Hasten to the spoil, speed to the prey. Doesn't sound a bit like God with us, does it? In Isaiah 7:14, behold, a virgin, and we looked at that word, and yes, the connotation is a virgin shall be with child.
One of them has a 700-year century scope, and the other one has a couple decade scope, or less than a decade, maybe.
It's actually less than a decade, but we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the parallel that some see and say that Isaiah 7:14 is fulfilled in Isaiah 8 and verse 3. The words of Alma that we looked at, a virgin, as King James translates it, in order to fulfill this in Isaiah 8 and 3, the prophetess here would have had to have been a virgin at the time it has been said. What's the problem with that? She already had a son by the name of Shear-jashub, as we saw in chapter 7 and verse 3. So she wasn't a virgin. So as similar as this is to Isaiah 7:14, the differences are of such a nature that it cannot be the fulfillment of Isaiah 7:14. It just cannot. But here in 8:3, you have the prophet Isaiah going into his wife, the prophetess. Should we just stop and ask, was that a woman prophet? Do we have women prophets? Had a woman judge? There were times in which God used women to speak his message. Would that be the case here? Not necessarily. It could be that she was being used by God to give a message. But to me, it seems more likely that it's dealing with she is the wife of the prophet, and thus using prophetess in that way. Now then, I would not argue strenuously either way. I'm just saying that's the way in which I think that it is being used here. Just to be clear, and I think we all know that, but if somebody watches this sometime in the future, just to make sure, women, can they teach today? Yes.
Priscilla and Aquila is a good example.
I'm not trying to get into detail. I'm just wanting to go through the process. Can women teach today? Yes. Can they teach men today? Yes. Can they do such in a public way or in an authoritative way? No. Their teaching must be in connection with, but I suffer not a woman to teach nor usurp authority over the man. In 1 Timothy 2. And so while they have and can teach a man, they cannot take that authoritative role. They cannot, and the word King James translates it usurp authority. Actually, it's just exercising authority. That they do not have the right to exercise authority in that teaching over man. So while a woman can teach, for example, Colossians 3:16, they sing, and in that singing they teach and admonish. But it would be wrong for a woman to take a leadership role in that and being the song leader, because then she is exercising authority over the man. In a Bible class such as this, a woman can teach, but she could not take the role of the teacher. I have been taught in Bible classes in which I am the teacher and I am exercising that role of authority, but yet I've had many women through the years teach me in that type of a situation, in the comments that they make, in the questions that they ask. So, yes, a woman can do that within the confines of 1 Timothy 2 and verses 12 and following.
When she does teach, making comments during the teacher, in response to what she hears from the teacher, she's supposed to have the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which in the sight of God is a great prize. 1 Peter 3, you could tie it all together.
Okay. That would be a meek and quiet spirit. That's the demeanor that she is to have all the time, though. Let's also say that anyone, man or woman, can start usurping the authority of the teacher, even though they are not the teacher. Sometimes the teacher loses control of the class, and it's his responsibility to take it back at that point in time. But that's just as an aside in relationship to what we see here. He goes into the prophetess. She conceives, and the prophetess there, again, Isaiah's wife, and she bears a son. And in relationship to that, the Lord had given him the command, call his name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. So it's going to be according to what God had set forth. Now then in verse 4, for before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. So he's going into the prophetess, his wife. She conceives, bears a child. Now then, before that child is able to speak the basic words, that's my father, my mother. Those are just basic words. How many times do you see a parent with a small baby, mama, mama, or papa, papa, teaching that child to speak basic words? Those are usually about the first words that a child learns, aren't they? So before this child is able to speak these basic words, Syria and Israel would be destroyed. Damascus, as we've noted, is the capital of Syria. Samaria is the capital of Israel, or Ephraim, or the northern kingdom. All of those terms being used for that land. Now then, this scroll with the name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz was a living testament to their destruction. They're going to be destroyed. The spoil, the riches of Damascus, the spoil of Samaria, taken away. What does Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz mean again? Hasten to the spoil. Notice that, the spoil of Samaria. Speed to the prey. They are going to be a prey for Syria. And that's what takes place. So again, God is giving a time frame that you don't have to worry about these two nations that you're worried about. In 7:14, you have the house of David is going to continue on till this Messiah comes. Virgin born, God with us. But your immediate fear right now, right here, is these two nations, Israel and Syria. Capitals, Damascus and Samaria. Within this time frame in which Isaiah goes into the prophetess, his wife, and she conceives, bears a child, and before that child can say the basic words, those two nations will be destroyed. Now then, you can ask the question to Ahaz, why go to Syria to get relief from these two nations? That's really, to a great extent, the point of the entirety of chapter 7 and this part of chapter 8. There's no reason to go to Assyria and to make an alliance with Assyria because of your fear of these two nations that are within a few years, and that's going to be really a short period of time, isn't it? In which Isaiah is able to go into his wife and she conceives. Well, that's about 9 months, isn't it? And then before the child can say the basic words, now how long is that going to be? Maybe a year? Less than a year? So within a couple of years, these two nations are going to be destroyed. Why go to Assyria? Rely upon God. Well, Lord willing, we'll start with chapter 8 and verse 5 next time.